Yeah, so I just got this holiday in before the lockdown kicked in this country. I've been to Sri Lanka twice before. Some of you will know it, others may not. So it's a large island, about roughly the size of Britain, I think, off the southeast side of India. And in this map, the grey area in the top left corner is that part of India. And if you're going to Sri Lanka, you fly to Colombo, the capital city, illustrated by a star here on the west coast. And if you're going for a wildlife holiday, you probably go south from there, because the main birds of interest, the endemics, are in rainforest in the south, particularly southwest. And if you're going to see mammals or leopards, the best place to go is Yala National Park on the south coast. So I spent most of my time on my previous two trips in that part of southern third of Sri Lanka. But I wanted to go somewhere different this time. Also, Yala, although it is a great place for leopards, everybody knows that. So you get a large number of tourists going there, and it can get a bit like an East African safari, where you've got masses of vehicles homing in on anything interesting like a lion kill or a cheetah with cubs. And then it becomes unpleasant, really, with engines revving and diesel fumes being given off. So this time I went north of Colombo, and you may be able to see on the west coast there's a yellow peninsula area here. And I was on the mainland, roughly opposite the end of that peninsula, around here, for most of the time. I stayed in two different places while I was in Sri Lanka. One was near the coast there, and that, I'll show you a slide of that. I'll show you that now. Backwaters Lodge. That's 10 minutes drive from a national park called Wilpattu National Park, which is a very good national park. And this part of Sri Lanka doesn't get so many tourists. The tourist infrastructure isn't as developed here as it is in the south. And so you can have a more peaceful drive around and encounter some interesting wildlife without necessarily having other jeeps converging on you. The two places I stayed at, this one and another one more central, and both were recommended to me by Gehan de Silva, who many of you know and who is in this meeting this evening. So hello, Gehan, and thanks again for recommending these places. This one, the backwaters, is a kind of an eco lodge, solar water heating, but also extensive reuse of materials, which I'll show you in a minute. It has a few acres of grounds that you can walk around, and along one side it has a backwater, a kind of lagoon, where you can do a boat trip, or you can just sit on the shore there and watch the birds go fly past. And in the grounds, you get troops of monkeys moving through two different species. And apparently, occasionally, the odd elephant or two wander through, because they're not all confined to the national park down the road. And I didn't actually see any in the grounds while I was there. They come at night time. But I was told by the owner, this is the owner here, Tariq, that he put up the gate here and initially kept it closed at night, but found that this led to the elephants breaking down the fence. So now there's been negotiations, and a mutually acceptable outcome is that if he leaves the gate open during the night, the elephants will leave his fence untouched, undamaged. So if we go along, this is one of the main bits of reused materials. All of the rooms where the guests are staying are made from old freight containers. So that's what this is, and it's divided into two, the bedroom, and the smaller room is the bathroom. And they're all located not at ground level, but they're like large tree houses with a balcony like this one. You can sit outside and watch the birds. You'll see the monkeys go through occasionally, the giant squirrel, the grizzle squirrel. So it's a really nice place to chill out. I'm going to show birds first, as Graham said. I'm going to start with bee eaters. And there's 3 species of bee eaters that you're likely to see on a trip to Sri Lanka. One is the blue-tailed bee eater, this one. And you see the throat is a kind of multi-coloured throat on this one. Another is the chestnut-headed bee eater with this yellowy, sulphurous yellowy throat. This one is making a hole in the ground. If you've seen bee eaters in Europe, you may have seen the fact that they burrow in a sandbank often, and live in small colonies there, or breed in small colonies. So this one, I think, is making a burrow, but it's not on a vertical sandbank wall, and I would have thought that it was rather vulnerable to predators if it tries to nest down there, but that's what it's doing, and it's actually got a kind of a stone in its bill that's just removing. But a beautiful bird, as you can see. And the third one you're likely to see is the little green bee eater. So pretty well green all over, apart from that blue throat. And again, this one is just starting to burrow into the ground, it seemed to me, to my bafflement, but Gehan might have some light to throw on that later on, that behavior. So the bee eaters, we see them perched on branches, and then they launch themselves off into the air if they see an interesting juicy insect flying past. The little green bee eaters, this species, tend to be on lower branches, and then the other 2 species on higher branches. They eat a variety of insects, not only bees. This one's got something in its bill. I can't quite see what it is, but it looks to me to be too small to be a bee, probably. This one is called a butterfly. And on previous trips, I've photographed this species and the blue-tailed with dragonflies, that they're called. Let's have a look at some other terrestrial birds now. This one is the emerald dove, for obvious reasons. It likes woodland areas, and this is photographed in the national park I mentioned, Wilpatu National Park, which is made up of a mixture of woodlands and lakes and kind of grassland around the lakes. An attractive looking bird, often seen on the ground, sometimes on branches. Here's another species that tends to be a ground dwelling species. This is the Indian pitta. And I'd seen this once before in southern India, in Kerala. When I was with a bird guide, he took me to a particular spot in a forest where he'd seen the bird before and attracted it out. And I had this impression that the Indian pitta was a really shy bird, difficult to see. But certainly in Sri Lanka anyway, that seems not to necessarily be the case. And this one I photographed at the Backwaters Lodge, which I mentioned earlier. One of the staff said to me, are you interested in seeing the Indian pitta? I said, oh yeah, you bet I am. And he said, oh, well, we often have one out the back here, just outside the kitchen area. I'll just go have a look and see if it's there. And he came back saying, yes, you're in luck, it's there. And so I had my camera with me as breakfast time, and I rushed through to the back and managed to get this photo of it before it disappeared into the undergrowth. This is another ground-dwelling species, and this one is endemic to Sri Lanka and is the national bird of Sri Lanka. It's the Ceylon jungle fowl. But you can see the similarity between this and our domesticated birds. Not such a colourful species, but very striking nevertheless. This is the magpie robin, or oriental magpie robin. And the fact that it's called magpie is pretty evident why that is. I'm not sure if it's a member of the robin family. It's actually quite a bit bigger than our robin, but I guess it does look quite like a robin. Here's another photo of the species. But I think another reason why it's called robin, maybe its behavior. It's like our robin, it's quite tame and has a confiding nature. And once I was staying in a hotel in India, and a pair of these were nesting inside the hotel. There was a terracotta pot attached to the wall of the staircase, and they were nesting in that. It was a deep pot, so all you could see was the end of the female's tail protruding above the edge of the pot. And the male, of course, had to come in and out with food for her. So he'd fly in through the main entrance of the hotel and across the lobby to the nest. Another pied bird, the Malabar pied hornbill, with this fantastic casque on its bill. Again, it's obvious why it's called pied, but why Malabar? Well, Malabar is another name for a region of southwest India that roughly corresponds to Kerala. And this species is found there as well, as are quite a few of the species that are found in Sri Lanka. You also find some endemic species are common to Sri Lanka and the Western Ghats in India. This bird looks a bit strange. I haven't photoshopped it. It must have been just jumping down from one branch to the one below and relying on gravity, so not needing to use its wings. So I just frozen it midair. Of course, that was a deliberate shot of mine. Anyway, this is a minivet, and Sri Lanka has two species of minivet. This is the small minivet, which is the more common species. And in the minivets, the males tend to be black and orange like this, and the females black and yellow, but very attractive birds, colourful birds. Another colourful bird, quite common as well, is the black hooded oriole. I photographed this and the previous bird in the grounds of the second hotel where I stayed. This bird is common throughout much of South Asia. I've seen it in Bangladesh and India as well. Lovely bird. And even if you've not been to South Asia, you probably recognise this species from your back garden or parks in central London. The ring-necked or rose-ringed parakeet. South Asia is one of the regions that the birds we now have in Britain originated from. Another bird you'll know, even if you've not been to Sri Lanka or that part of the world, the peafowl. As I was putting this particular photo into the slide presentation, it just sort of struck me what an amazing bird it is. You know, there's no other bird like it, really, in terms of that huge, colourful tail that it has and the display that it puts on. And I think because we see them in captivity so much, we get habituated to them, or I do anyway, perhaps take them for granted a bit, but it's a fantastic bird. I sometimes wonder how they manage to survive in the wild with that big, heavy tail to drag around. I would kind of imagine that a predator like a jackal or a leopard could come along and pounce on it before it could get away. But obviously they do have a way of surviving. At night time, they ensure their safety by going into roost in a tree like this one. I've seen them been like that before on other visits to Sri Lanka up the tree, but what I've seldom seen is them flying from top to bottom, or from ground to tree, or tree back down to ground. But and somebody said to me in Sri Lanka that they don't fly. Well, they obviously do fly. They don't climb the tree. But I did manage to get a shot of one in flight this time, so there's the proof that they fly. This may look superficially a bit like a woodpecker, but it's not. It's a barbet, and there are, I think, two or three species of barbet in Sri Lanka. This, I think, is the more common species, the brown-headed barbet, and I think they're mainly fruit eaters. But this is quite common, but not seen so often. You hear it more than you see it. Probably a bit like our woodpeckers in that respect. You hear the call, but this one drew my attention by virtue of the fact that it was tapping away at the wood here. It's is, I think, not trying to necessarily find grubs, but more likely trying to create a hole to build a nest in. Now let's have a look at some water birds. Where I was, it was initially close to the sea, and the whole of the time in fairly low-lying land. So there's lots of water there, lots of lakes, coastline, and so on. And this is one of the birds that you're likely to see. This is the darter. And if you've been to Africa, you will have seen the African darter, possibly. This is the Indian darter, or Asian darter. It's also known as the snake bird for kind of obvious reasons. That long, curving neck does rather look like a snake. And when they're fishing, they behave like cormorants. They sit on the surface of the water and dive under after fish. But more of their main part of their body is submerged than in the case of the cormorant. So the neck really does look like a snake protruding out of the water. There are cormorants in Sri Lanka as well. These are little cormorants. There's about 20 of them in this tree. And this is taken in Wilpatu National Park. And I mentioned that there are water bodies in the park, and this is a typical one. And at the bottom of the tree is a wild pig, and I'll go into wild pigs a bit more when we come to the mammals. Egrets. There are a few species of egrets, I think 5 altogether in Sri Lanka. This cattle egret has just pounced on a butterfly. It's not just the bee eaters that eat butterflies. And this is the great egret, or great white egret, which is the same species that we get in Europe, but a different subspecies. This is the commonest species of heron in Sri Lanka, the Indian pond heron. You can see it in village ponds or along the edge of village ponds. You can see it in paddy fields, and as in this case, you could see it in mangrove areas. I don't know if you could tell, but these are mangrove roots where it's perched here, just along the edge of the coast. And of course, another species of water bird or family is the kingfishers. You could find our common kingfisher in Sri Lanka, and it is quite common. This is the largest species, the stalk-billed kingfisher. And another common species, also quite large, the white-throated kingfisher. There are also various species of storks that you could see. This one, I think, looks rather strange, maybe a bit prehistoric with that bill. This is the open bill stork, or Asian open bill, and you can see why it's called that. This one's got its bill rather muddied. I think that's mud caked over it, apart from at the base. Here's a photo of a different one without the mud. Really quite a strange looking bird, I think. The painted stork is another common species, rather colourful with a yellowy bill and that sort of pinky orangey bald patch on the head, and also a bit of pink in the wing feathers as well as the legs. This one is the woolly-necked stork, not as common as the previous species. This one looks like it's just caught some kind of crustacean, I think, in the end of its bill there. This one's in Wilpatu as well, National Park. This bird is an ibis, though you can't see the curved bill, and it's a black-necked ibis, but without a very black neck. So I think it's probably a juvenile bird, not yet developed the full plumage. There are also different species of terns. I think this one is the common tern, same species that we get. And I think this one is the whiskered tern. But Gehan, if I'm incorrect on that, perhaps you could let us know afterwards. Another strange looking bird, looking a bit prehistoric with that thick, massive bill. This is the great thickney, so I think it's the biggest of the thickney family. And if you think it looks vaguely familiar, the stone curlew that we get belongs to the same family of birds as this. There's quite a variety of waders in Sri Lanka, including some that we get, like this black-tailed godwit, but also some that we don't get in Britain. This is a golden plover, but not the golden plover that we get. This is the Pacific golden plover. And this looks quite similar to our common snipe, but in fact it's another species that we don't get, and that's the pin-tailed snipe. Lovely intricate patterns in the feathers there. A very common species of wader in Sri Lanka is the red-wattled lapwing. And a less common species is the yellow-wattled lapwing. Didn't see many of these. I'm going to show you some photos of large raptors, most of which are fish-eating raptors, reflecting the extensive wetland habitats that were in the area where I had the trip. So I'll start with the commonest species. This is the Brahmini kite. And this one's just caught a fish and is just tucking into it. This species is found in other South Asian countries as well, like India and Bangladesh, and is pretty common in Sri Lanka. Here's another photo of one. A very attractive bird, I think. Here's a bigger and less common bird, the white-bellied sea eagle. But still you can see them quite often. Often, but not always, in coastal areas. This one was actually on the coast, just on the edge of a mangrove forest. So I'm in a boat when I took this shot on the sea. This is the grey-headed fish eagle, which is more of an inland water bird with a slimmer head than the previous eagle. If you're a fish and you've survived the day without being caught by any of these bird-catching raptors and without being caught by kingfisher, don't drop your guard, because if it's the end of the day, the night shift will be coming in. The brown fish owl may be after you. This bird I photographed in the grounds of the second hotel where I stayed. One of the people staying there said that he'd had 4 of them outside of his room the previous night. calling to each other. So I guess that was a family of them. And finally, I'll show you a raptor that's not a fish eater, or not exclusively. This is the commonest of the more land-based, large land-based raptors, the crested serpent eagle. You can't see the crest because it only manifests itself when the bird gets excited. It's obviously not very excited at the moment. Nice bird. This is in the forest area at Wilpatu. So I saw one or two in the trees there, and this one on the ground. I'm not sure why it's come down to the ground. Anyway, that's raptors, and that's birds. So let's move on to lizards and mammals. I'm going to start with the lizards, and I'm only going to look at monitor lizards. Now, I don't know if any of you have seen monitor lizards, but they tend to be rather big lizards, like this one. There are two species, the water monitor and the land monitor. I think this one is the water monitor. And this is in the grounds of the second hotel, which was alongside a lake. And so this bird was walking along the edge of the lake. And I was sitting on a bench there, just having a look at me, checking me out. But pretty impressive. As long as you leave them alone, you're okay. You don't really want to get into a tangle with these monitor lizards. They can grow to a few feet in length. They have sharp teeth and sharp claws. So best if we steer clear of each other, I think. This is the other species, the land monitor. And you often see them up trees. They're very good climbers. You can see, I think, if you look at the fingers of this one, they've got long claws, which again make them dangerous, but also means that they're able to climb trees very proficiently. And this one was in the grounds of the Backwaters Lodge, the first place I stayed at. And I noticed it just after I'd had breakfast one morning, because you sit outside on the veranda having breakfast and look across an open space, and this tree is in the middle of the open space. And this is about 20 feet up. And I just sort of thought I noticed some movement in the tree, because this is about 30 meters from where I was sitting. And got my binoculars onto it and realized that this is what I'd seen moving. And basically, they're cold-blooded animals, of course, so they become more active as it gets warmer. And in the morning, the sun would warm up the tree, and this lizard, which had its home in this tree hole, and it would gradually emerge, extending further out of the hole until it came right out, and then would go off and do its business for the day. Anyway, enough of lizards, on to mammals. This is wild pig or wild boar. Quite common, I think. They move around in groups of 10, 15, 20. This is same spot as those little cormorants that I showed earlier in the tree at the lakeside, inside Wilpatu National Park. And that may even be the same one that was on the little cormorants photo earlier. So it's the same tree anyway, next to the water. And these can be quite dangerous animals. You don't want to get the wrong side of that, just like our own European wild boar can be. You wouldn't think so, but in groups they can be quite ferocious, and even leopards will shy away from them. They're also carnivores, omnivores, but they eat meat as well as other kinds of food. So I heard of one case where a leopard had killed a deer, ate some of it, and then gone up the tree for a rest. And then this group of wild pig came along and started feeding on the deer, on the carcass of the deer, and the leopard you'd think leopard would just shoo them away, but it was afraid to do so. It was too risky when they're in a group like that. This is another mammal that you see occasionally, the golden jackal. This is also known as the black-backed jackal. I think this race of it, if you like, you see in Sri Lanka has a darker back than that found in mainland in India. One of the smallest or smaller mammals that I saw, there are a few species of mongoose that you could see. I think this one is the Indian grey mongoose. This is the first mammal I saw on my first trip to Sri Lanka. We arrived late at the hotel I was staying at, and it was getting dark. And for some reason, they had the check-in counter in a little hut outside of the main building. So I was standing outside, checking in, filling in the details in the book, and this mammal ran across the path just about 3 feet away from me, and I figured it was a mongoose. There are 3 species of monkey in Sri Lanka. 2 of them are endemic, and this one is the one that isn't endemic. This is the grey langur, or Hanuman langur. So this is the one that you also see in India. And there was a troop of grey langurs that moved through the first place I stayed at, Backwaters Lodge, and they were also moving around the grounds of the second place that I stayed at, and so they're quite tame, they're quite used to humans there. This is one of the endemic species, the tok macaque. I often see their hair and their heads and think they've had a sort of pudding basin haircut. Anyway, this one is a young one, a juvenile. It's found something interesting that's caught its eye. And as part of the same troop, there was this pair. Now, monkeys I've noticed in Sri Lanka are quite happy to mate in public. They're not at all self-conscious. And so this pair knew I was there, but they weren't bothered. Have to get on with the job. The tok macaque moves around in troops of maybe 15, 20, 25 animals. These ones I photographed in Wulpatu National Park. There's one particular spot in the park where you can stop and get out of your vehicles and stretch your legs and go to the loo if you need to. And so that's where this was taken. We were having a little break, me and the driver, and this troop came along. I'd been eating some biscuits in my Jeep, and I'd left, rather foolishly, this packet of biscuits open on my seat. When I saw the troop, I called over to the driver and said, "Don't let them get my biscuits." So he went to my seat, the biscuits had already disappeared. One of the biggest animals around, not as big as the African elephant, but the Asian elephant's pretty big, isn't it? And elephants eat food that's not all that nutritious a lot of the time, so they have to eat large quantities of it, and which means that a lot of the time they are eating, as this one is, just about to put a mouthful of succulent grass, or a trunk full of succulent grass in its mouth. And here's another one eating some relatively dry grass. There are, I think, there are several different species of deer in Sri Lanka. This is the largest one, so it's a bit like, in a sense, the Sri Lankan equivalent of our red deer. This is the sambar. This is a pretty magnificent specimen, I think, this male with those large horns. We can't see all of the horns, unfortunately, in this picture. It doesn't seem to be a very common species. I think it's been subject to a lot of poaching. It's also very shy, perhaps partly for that reason, wary of humans, and also perhaps wary of leopards. Maybe not one of the main prey of leopards because it's quite scarce, I think, and as I said, quite shy, quite wary. but nevertheless a potential prey. I'll make a nice big meal or many meals for a leopard and its family. A smaller or medium-sized deer is the spotted deer. And this one is more likely to be taken by a leopard. Quite a magnificent male specimen here with those huge antlers. So this is a bit like an equivalent of our fallow deer. And I'm just coming towards the end of my presentation now, in case Graham's getting worried about the timing. Here's a female spotted deer suckling her fawn. Now, one of the things I hoped to photograph in Wilpattu National Park without the vehicles was the leopard, and I did manage to photograph it. It wasn't a great visit as far as leopards are concerned. I did see, this was the best view I had of one. This one came out in the open and walked across an open space at a bit of a distance from the vehicle. I did see another one in a tree hanging from or lying on a branch, you know, having an afternoon siesta. But anyway, at least I got to see this one, and because leopards are one of my favorite species. And that's it. So thank you.
Well, thanks, Czech. Absolutely amazing pictures. Really, really wonderful. I'm going to have to talk to you more about photography, but we won't do that now. So this is looking out of our bedroom window, very well in the middle of the night, really. And I love fog. That's a sunrise. Looking out of the loft window, and it was about a month ago, the sun rose right in the middle of this little gap, which is nice because I'm at the loft window, so I can't exactly move left and right. So I was lucky to get this the sun right in the middle. That was actually on the same day, just a little bit later, about 6:25. Went up. This is looking down back towards Marlow, which is sort of in the dip where the Thames is, and then there's some higher land on the other side. Lovely sort of misty morning, and that's actually on the river at Marlow, on the weir, which is
That's beautiful.
It's partly misty, and it's also all the water that's out of sight that's falling down and creating this sort of spray. So there we have a little bit of background, and I'm going to start on a few. Done this more or less in alphabetical order, so we're starting with buzzards, and as you find with lots of the
And magpie.
they yes, they get chased by corvids, all kinds of corvids, magpies and crows and so on. So that's quite common. And here we have red kites actually joined the buzzard. I don't know if they're trying to see off the magpie between them or quite what's going on. It's quite exciting to see that. And there's the buzzard on its own. This was a different day, nice blue sky. I haven't seen many buzzards at all. I think they're normally higher than the kites. For one thing, not as high as kites, you could say. Right, from B to C, a crow. Now we don't see many crows around here, but this was just in the next little village, and it got itself some kind of little something to have for tea. It looks like it's sat on the top of the tree. I think it's sort of showing off. Look at what I've got. You haven't got one of these. And then it decided it was about time to fly off. And I got it just spreading its wings, and off it flew very happily, presumably. Now, something that you'll all be familiar with, I'm sure, in London is, oh no, actually it's another another shot that I hadn't, I forgot was there, flying through a graveyard. Well, I was actually there trying to find the peregrine, which has been spotted on the top of the church, which we'll come to later. So here we are, some birds that you'll all be familiar with. They like Marlow as well, and especially Catherine's feeders. Nice in the sort of dappled sun, and having a watch before they go down and in between, see what's happening, see if there are any cats about or anything. Is it safe to go down? And yeah, these four, there was a bigger group, they all flew off across our garden and into a tree in the neighbor's garden, and it almost looks like a sequence of the same bird. I was quite happy with this, but it is actually four different birds, all different stages of flight. And then we have this great tit, I believe it is, one I actually had been going to, or coming back from catching the peregrine early in the morning without much success. And on the walk home, I had the feeling like I haven't been very lucky today, but often things happen when you least expect it. And I rounded a corner and there it was, this lovely great tit. And what it was doing is kind of raking in between the bricks, dislodging things. And it did quite a bit of that. It would find something and often drop it down to the ground beneath it. And worked its way down the wall. And finally went down and started getting the things that it just knocked out. Made a very nice little series of pictures. Now, all you bird spotters, I'm hoping that you'll be able to tell me whose feet these are. But you might say that I haven't given you enough clue. So there you go. These guys like hanging out down on the riverbank very happily. Now, what I've tried to do is get as many birds in flight as possible. It's a rather nice challenge to get birds in flight, and this one's a bit of an imposter. It's not a bird, but it's flying. So, and it actually gave me very nice views. We've got the back view and a side view. It's a hoverfly, by the way. I'm sure you can guess. And a front view. Very nice. Very hard to focus on, as you might imagine. But at least they stay still for a moment, which gives one half a chance. And even another side view. And I think we got one more of those. I was able to get a little bit closer. And now these birds normally don't fly very often. So when you see one flying, it's great fun to get them. We've got a couple of shots of herons. We do have some herons on the Thames, Marlow. Really wonderfully big birds. Next we should have some jackdaws, which fly around in huge groups occasionally. Quite something. This one I was watching down a little alley between shops, and it had got itself a huge piece of bread and flew up just onto the ground floor, just above the ground floor somewhere, and I was watching it, and I was just about to get a great picture, and some people came walking next to me, and it was already it wasn't long ago, already the time of the virus. And oh no, I have to move now because they're not moving around me. And of course I moved out of the way, the bird moved, and I just managed to get this really quick shot. So I've called it the escape, where it's almost out of the picture. And then we have three more jackdaws. This is called Arrivals and Departures on the top of Marlow's main church. Now we're going to kites, which really have caught my imagination. I'm just fascinated watching them flying. Really, really beautiful. birds, the way they sort of hang on the air and they just control the air and how it keeps them in the air. This was actually, this shot was from the shot where the buzzard was also there. And I thought this looked like a Japanese watercolor. Lovely sort of colors of the blue of the magpie and the red of the red kite. And kind of painterly sort of look to them. Amazing position of that, of that kite. It's a kite over our garden. They stay in trees that are on the opposite side of the garden of our house, on the front of the house. I assume they do have nests there because we see them quite often, we can hear them. And they seem to fly off towards the sort of northeast over our house, over our garden, and go some way away. But I can out of an upstairs window, I can see them many times, lots and lots of them, but rather too far away to photograph. Here we've got one going over. Really pleased. This was my absolute sort of ambition to get a few kites in great detail. I'm very pleased. You can see the tiny glint of light on the eye. And they're gorgeous colours. This one's actually got a little something in its beak. I couldn't make out. It looked like a leaf in shape, but it was orange. Maybe the skin of a bit of fruit or something. And like the buzzards and so on, the jackdaws and other corvids just seem to love to chase them, which I imagine is probably defending their nests, stopping the big birds going for their young. Same again. Again, that's looking over our garden. This one made a really sudden appearance from behind that tree on the right. Yeah, they're just suddenly in front of you. We have a few tall trees in the garden and neighbours' gardens, so it's difficult to get a nice clear view. It's looking absolutely straight up, and the eyes are a bit small in this picture, but it's looking straight down at me. Probably wants to know what kind of camera I'm using. These actually are like earlier I said, they usually circle round a bit far away to get a shot, but occasionally they are high up, but literally straight up above our garden. It's always a bit of a treat. Didn't get that in London. Pleased to get this one as well. Actually flying. These are the trees very near our house, at the front of the house. Just up one street a little bit, and to get it going through the trees and leaves. And then at a bit of a distance, there's a big field just over the bridge, the main Marlow bridge over the Thames. It's a great big field, and this was flying at quite a distance, quite small, but with a long lens, picking it out. And you can probably maybe see that the underside of the wings are very slightly green, and that's because they're being lit by the grass in the field underneath. And there's a hill on the other side of the field, so that's what you're seeing is the hill behind the bird. A bit closer, another close-up one, sort of dramatic one where the sun was just catching the head and neck. And this one then swooped away from me and saw it had a feather sticking out, a loose feather. It's quite sweet. And we have one I call the duo. They often fly around in pairs, or maybe not flying all the time in pairs, but come together as a pair. And I often wonder, is this sort of bonding, or is it fighting? It's hard to tell because they kind of throw themselves at each other sometimes. Bit of acrobatics. So, for example, here, these two are flying absolutely head on towards each other. and at the last minute they pull away, so there's no collision. You think, is this them having a bit of fun, or are they fighting? Don't know. It's the same pair. There's a rather wide-eyed one. And next one I call the spy, looking down. Of course, they're always checking the ground to see what they find. This one, I actually got about 6 pictures of it, but I couldn't tell what it was carrying. I think it has to be the tail of something like a rat, but couldn't tell. It was too confusing and too dark under its belly to see what it had between its claws. Nice sort of sharp one against all these nice blue skies we've been having until a couple of days ago. And 2 birds, I think these 2 did look like they were fighting to me. Claws out and throwing themselves around quite a bit. And these 2 are fully upside down, which they just flipped over and flipped back again very, very quickly. I was lucky to get the shot. One on the left, even its head is upside down. The one on the right spun its head round, trying to do an owl imitation, perhaps. Funny to see the underside of the wings facing upwards. This one pretty much coming straight on. Another 2. One in the distance. Got a little series here I call Air Authority, just sort of controlling the air and maneuvering around, making lovely shapes, absolutely gorgeous shapes. Once again being chased. I think it was a crow this time, or it was hard to tell. And it's got something. I don't think this is food. Maybe it's taking something back to make its nest look prettier. Well, it didn't look very attractive to me. It looked like some ugly bit of debris. I really want to get more of these so that it shows the bird in context, right over the rooftops. It's great fun. A little gull in the top right corner as well. Okay, we left the kites. We're on to pigeons. I took this and put the little window in, which is an enlargement of one of the birds there, because this flock were flying in a very tight pack, around and around and around. And when I looked, zoomed in, I saw they were all ringed. They all had a red ring on their left leg and white or silver ring on their right leg. So I don't know if they were racing pigeons or what, but it's quite interesting to see. And we have a little romance now. I'm calling this the single pigeon, or perhaps it's one of the doves, that's put out a gold chain because it's feeling a bit lonely and it wants to attract a mate. And a few minutes later, it attracted a mate, and I think they're kissing. Bit of romance for you tonight. Nice golden sky. Here's some more pigeons. This was a bit actually a couple of months ago, flying around over the river. No idea if these were ringed, but I don't think so. They just would sit on the bridge and then fly off, and then sit on the bridge again and fly off. Right, here we are, Mr. Peregrine, sitting on the church, doing a bit of a shuffle round, which I realized was actually shaking a leg in preparation for the next picture. Don't be easily offended, but this picture I'm calling outtake, and you'll see the reason why. There's the outtake. It's just got rid of some food of one description or another. But here it is, looking a bit more respectable. Very nice. And there it is, with an extremely full crop and an eye closed. I think it's settling down for a very long period of digesting, and looking very nice against the stone, which this next one is rather well camouflaged. There's just a little bit of sunlight right on its head, which I was well pleased with. I think churches were made for peregrines. All these little bits that stick out are wonderful. And we actually went for a walk and came back, and it had moved up right to the top of the church. And there it is, cleaning its claws and with a little something buzzing around next to it. Someone from, there's a group here called Wild Marlow, which started up just before we moved in. So it was wonderful. Catherine's now on the steering committee and fully committed. And one of the ladies from there said, "Oh, where was this taken?" She's lived in Marlow all her life, I think. And I said, "Well, it was taken on the top of the church." She said, "Oh, I've never noticed the cross." She said, "I'm always looking at the birds and not the cross." Right, rooks, which are on this big field across the river where I had that one single bird, a kite against the hill in the background with the woods. This one I call pole vault. The rooks seem to do this hop when they take off, at least the few I've noticed now. So it's hopping off into flight. I don't really know rooks very well. They have such amazingly strong looking beaks. Actually, some of Czech's pictures of some of those birds, they're enormously strong looking beaks. And this reminded me of these rooks. And our first swift of this year, which for us was early. In Chiswick, we used to see them around the 7th of May, and here we are on 25th of April and spotted a few swifts. This was actually at a camera, sort of big out of focus thing is on the left, above a car park. When we suddenly looked up and saw this, I thought, oh, it'd be nice, like surveillance. We're surveying the swifts. Swift with a kite in the background. And probably one of the best shots I've got this year so far, a bit of detail, and amazingly reflective their feathers are when the sun catches them. That was above our garden. Just a little bit of vegetation there. And a few off together on a screaming party, just a couple of streets away. And they flying round and round as they do. Flew around again past this chimney. I was well pleased that one of them's casting a shadow on the chimney. Hopefully you can see that. You know, catching the sunlight on their wings. Very low sun. This was quite late at night. This was, what was this? It was about quarter to 9. Well, between 8:15 and 9:15. This one was actually at 8:45. And now a brand new bird for me. One more swift. Not quite in focus, but over the moon. So I was over the moon to get it. Right, I think we're now on to the sand martins, which I've never photographed before. I'm not sure I even know I've seen them before. And we found them on the river, going into the bank right underneath our feet, so we couldn't see what they were going into. But well, we were actually standing on the side of the lock. So presumably it has holes in it beneath us that they were going in and out of. Very hard to follow because it was quite dark. But if they went against the sky, I could catch them. And then got lucky with this one, beak open, which I noticed in the back of the camera. But when I got home and saw the picture a bit closer, you can see the little dot in front of it. It's actually after a bit of dinner, which I imagine was about a millisecond away from catching it, because they fly very fast. Here's your token sparrow. Just we do have some sparrows around, so I've put one picture in, and a bit of a token starling, very pretty against the sky here. got himself something to eat. And we'll give you the token swan, because the swans are quite famous in Marlow. I was hoping to see the swan upping this year, but I'm not sure it's going to happen. I've got a date, I think it's in July, to look that up. See if it's going to happen or not. And another new bird for me to, well, at least to get in a photograph is a tern that was over the river as well. And then we finish off alphabetically with W, and I've got a couple of wagtails for you. So this one was again on the lock, and something or other I was very interested in. And final picture, it flies away. Just managed to get that. So there we go.